Known for their courage and honor, the Ultramarines are often considered the strongest among the Space Marine chapters in the Warhammer 40k universe. Over the course of time, this video game franchise has established an extensive amount of lore with respect to the Ultramarines. These warriors are known for following the teachings of Primarch Raboot Guilliman for over 10,000 years, and they've stood out in numerous story arcs across the Warhammer 40k universe. Today, we'll take a deep dive into their history, realm, and operational processes, and tell you everything there is to know about these mighty warriors. Before we go into our explanation, we have a very small request. If you like our content, please support us by subscribing to our channel. This is a small click for you, but for us, it means a lot. Thank you. Let's begin. Who are the Ultramarines in the Warhammer 40k universe? While die-hard fans know all about the Ultramarines' contribution as the 13th Space Marine Legion, casual enjoyers of the franchise might recognize them as the warriors who single-handedly held the Imperium together after the Horus Heresy incident. They started out as a Space Marine Legion, but things soon changed after the reforms that initiated the second founding. The Ultramarines got their names from the chapter's galactic origins, and it stands out among other chapters due to the role they played in providing the Gene Seed. This Gene Seed essentially acted as the source for many future chapters, and it was in fact used to create more chapters than all of the past Gene Seeds combined. The Ultramarines were loosely inspired by the Old Earth's Roman Empire, and they strictly followed the Codex Astartes and the societal rules on their homeworld, Macragge. They directly ruled over the subsector of space in the Segmentum Ultima region of Ultramar. The Ultramarines' Primarch, Raboot Guilliman, was often known as the Lord of Macragge, or the Master of Ultramar. While we will get into their history in detail, they were most notably known for standing at the front lines in the war against the traitor, the alien, and the daemon, and they even gained a reputation as noble defenders of humanity. Exploring Ultramarines' chapter appearance. Each chapter had its own unique appearance, and the Ultramarines were known for painting their armor and vehicles in ultramarine shades of blue. They were characterized by an inverted white Grecian letter Upsilon as their symbol, and they sometimes used black and yellow chevrons on their power fists and other such weapons. The higher-level officers and elite squads often had the two-headed eagle sigil Aquila on their vehicles and uniforms, and these sigils had a golden trim that distinguished them from other Imperium warriors. The Ultramarine shoulder plate armor had different color variations depending on which company they belonged to. For instance, the Space Marines with the first company had white trims, the second company Marines had gold trims, and so on. These colors were as per the Codex Astartes, and the Ultramarines also had to wear their squad tactical specialty symbols on the right pauldrons. These symbols represented squads such as Battle Line, Close Support, Fire Support, Veteran, and Command, and they had to wear their squad number in a high Gothic font in the center of the symbol. Typically, the sergeants wore red helms with a white skull, while the veterans wore armor with a white helm. Anyone with a veteran sergeant status had a red helm with a white stripe and a white skull in the center, and captains typically had a blue helm with a white skull. Lieutenants in the Ultramarine army wore white and red helms with white skulls, while librarians were identified with the help of vertical white strips down the center of their helms. The apothecaries typically used blue power armor, but the rest of their inventory, such as gauntlets, pauldrons, and backpacks, were white in color. The Ultramarines' chapter badge was a white Terran Ultima glyph, strikingly similar to the Grecian letter found around the Ultramar region. After the Legion reunited with their Primarch on Macragge, this symbol sealed the Ultramarines to their newly established realm of Ultramar. A brief history of Ultramarines. Even amid all the chaos of the disastrous civil war orchestrated by Horus, the Ultramarines, or the 13th Legion, has emerged as the singular most powerful military force in the Imperium. Their power made them the perfect target for the traitors, who orchestrated the cataclysmic Battle of Calth. Unfortunately, the Ultramarines suffered great losses in this war, despite the genius of Primarch Raboot Guilliman. However, they had all the courage they needed to rebuild themselves and emerge victorious at the end of the day. While this battle defines the history of the Ultramarines, the Legion's origins can be traced all the way back to Terra during the Unification Wars. They recruited initiates and trained them in their ways while raising a new generation of warriors with the help of their Gene Seeds. While the 13th Legion was building itself during the early days of the Great Crusade, some human colonies were oppressed by the Xenos while other worlds aligned themselves with the Imperium. With time, the Emperor enforced several strategies to turn the tide in their favor, and he soon managed to expand the Imperium with the help of the Space Marine Legions. At the time, there were about 8,000 Astartes in the Ultramarines Legion, and they played an integral role in the Imperium's efforts to liberate Dionys, destroy the Scorvidian Xeno Empire, and embark on other solo operations on the worlds of Lorin Sigma, Sequel's Landing, and Nedeble. They later recruited most of their first-generation soldiers from these worlds, while the Emperor strived to restructure the Space Marine Legions more efficiently. By the third solar decade of the Great Crusade, the Ultramarines Legion developed a distinct character for themselves. and they'd managed to recruit about 33,000 Space Marines by the year 833 M30. They eventually got involved in the Osiris Cluster Rebellion, played an important role in the attack against Xenos on Septus 12. As time passed, Roboute Guilliman stepped up to be the Ultramarines Primarch, and he was notably known as the son of Macragge. It was said that the Emperor of Mankind had artificially engineered the Primarchs by using his genome and then bestowing them with unique superpowers. He stored them in gestation capsules, and one such capsule fell upon the world of Macragge, and Conor Guilliman then adopted this infant and named him Roboute Guilliman. He grew unnaturally fast after emerging from the capsule, and he soon dedicated his life to the advancement and betterment of the Ultramarines. Unfortunately, Conor Guilliman was soon killed by his co-consul Galan during a coup d'etat, and Roboute found out all about his father's death after returning from a successful mission. He tried his best to revive his father, who only briefly returned to life to warn Roboute about Galan. At this point, Roboute's rage knew no bounds, and this was one of the many experiences that shaped his personality. Soon after, the Emperor ended up visiting him and identified him as one of his lost gene sons before bestowing him with the title of Primarch. Roboute spent the next few decades of his life to establish the realm of Ultramar and develop his troops, unaware of the fact that War Master Horus was planning their downfall. With time, the Ultramarines and the Imperium struggled to defeat Overlord Urlak Uruk of the Orc Empire, and this defeat was soon followed by the catastrophic Battle of Calth. Horus had finally shown his true colors, and the Ultramarines' conflict with him resulted in great losses for the Ultramarines, followed by the creation of the Shadow Crusade. Roboute also made some harsh decisions, such as exiling Lionel Johnson for obsessively hunting the Night Haunter, after he put forth some opposing views while forming new policies. Moreover, the Lion ended up imposing martial law on Macragge after a suicide bombing incident, and Guilliman objected to this until the Lion decided to leave. In the aftermath of such incidents, the Ultramarines fought in the Second Battle of Davin and the Siege of Terra, while the Imperium decided that Horus Heres's betrayal had left them weak. They undertook some reforms, and the Ultramarines notably held the Imperium together in such a vulnerable moment. With time, the Ultramarines Legion underwent some structural reforms, but we'll look at them in detail later. The Ultramarines then continued to play a role in freeing the Iron Warriors, who had been caught up in a siege known as the Iron Cage, and Guilliman continued to fight against forces of evil. He personally dueled against the Alpha Region Primarch Alfarius on Escrador, and he eventually ensured that the Ultramarines got their revenge for the events that took place on Calth. They destroyed Lorgar's homeworld, Colchis, and Roboute then led the Ultramarines to victory in the legendary Battle of Thessala. Over time, the Ultramarines were caught up in the events of the Tyrannic Wars against the Hive Fleet Behemoth, which subsequently gave way to the Battle of Macragge in 745 M41. The 4th Company of the Ultramarines especially held a lot of hatred towards the Tyranids, and they stood at the forefront against them when one of the Tyranid Hive Fleets tried to invade their homeworld. While they managed to defeat them, it came at the cost of losing most of the Ultramarines' veteran, but the 4th Company's courage shone brighter than any enemy forces and helped them restore normalcy. These events were followed by the Ultramar Campaign and the Terran Crusade, and their battle seemed endless as they found themselves at the Battle of Lion's Gate as soon as the past battles died down. The Ultramarines also saw some tough times after the death of Roboute Guilliman, but he eventually resurrected himself and returned in all his glory. He then undertook the responsibility of forming the Indomitus Crusade in an attempt to safeguard the realm of Ultramar from any incoming attacks. The Ultramarines Primaris Marines then played a huge role in the War of Beasts on the planet of Vigilus, which was immediately followed by the Plague Wars in 999 M41, also known as the War of Flies, and their fortress monastery on Macragge was also under attack. The realm of Ultramar suffered great damage and destruction during this war, and the Lord Commander of the Imperium stepped up to rebuild the place. The Ultramarines' history can be notably defined in the form of the campaigns they undertook and all the events that transpired in that time. For instance, the dawn of the Imperium lasted from M30 to M31, while the following years were defined as the Age of Rebirth. This was followed by the Ultramar Ascendant campaign from M34 to M40, which also ushered in the Age of Redemption in M37 and M38. The last of the Ultramarines' eras lasted from M41 to M42, also known as the Time of Ending and Indomitus era. Realm of Ultramar, the domain of the Ultramarine Space Marine chapter. After surviving the Second Foundling, the surviving Ultramarines Legion developed quite a fond relationship with the inhabitants of surrounding planets. Soon enough, the worlds around Macragge offered recruits for the Ultramarines and provided them with weaponry, raw materials, and spacecrafts. While they didn't need to recruit more warriors after the reorganization of the Legion, their traditions continued, and they recruited warriors from the entire local space area. Soon enough, the area around Macragge became known as the Realm of Ultramar, and it stood out as the largest expanding empire among all the Space Marine chapters. While other chapters often ruled over a couple of planets or asteroids, the Realm of Ultramar had more than 500 worlds divided into fiefdoms. Some of these included Sadamanth, Konor, Occluder, and Diax, and all of these fiefdoms were ruled by an Ultramarines captain chosen by Roboute Guilliman. The structure of the Ultramarines Legion. Right from their initial days, the Ultramarines 13th Legion followed the strictures of the Principia Bellicosa. These organizational structures were laid down by the Emperor at the start of the Great Crusade, and they typically sorted the Legion's warriors into companies of about 1,000 warriors. These warriors were divided into chapters of 10 companies, and the Ultramarines stuck to this structure for the longest time, while other legions eventually modified their structure. Over time, Roboute Guilliman expanded on this existing structure. Instead, Guilliman worked on expanding the Legion's practice of picking up on their comrade Legion's tactics and then imbibing their routines in their own units. This was a testament to Guilliman's attention to detail, and he was on a relentless journey of analyzing everything around him to find ways to improve the Legion. He hoped to make a meaningful impact on the Ultramarines' welfare, always looked for possibilities for improvement. Typically, the 13 Legion's tactics heavily relied on applying an overwhelming amount of force and taking their opponents by surprise. They favored tactical diversity and typically deployed units with large stocks of non-standard equipment and ammunition. They trained their companies in a way that every Ultramarine company would be individually equipped to face and defeat their enemies in any environment imaginable. To ensure success, every chapter included a mix of tactical and assault units, armor, and a variety of gunships and vehicles. In the later years of the Great Crusade, the masses were subdivided into individual expeditionary fleets, but their values remained the same. They tried to standardize all their equipment bases to ensure that it was easy to mass produce them, which greatly benefited them for years to come. Of course, there were a few units that preferred working with their own weapons or non-standard equipment, and the 4th and 22nd chapters are notable examples of this deviation. The 4th chapter was notably known for operating 5 times as many armored vehicles as the others, while the 22nd chapter controlled large numbers of Space Marines who worked as destroyer units. This chapter was notably deployed for exterminatus operations on a routine basis by the Legion, but Guilliman personally wasn't a massive fan of such weapons that destroyed land. He believed that the destruction of land was a poor way of liberating any world, but he refrained from banning such weapons just in case of emergencies. Over time, some chapters retained the structure of the older 13 Legion, but with time, most of the Ultramarines followed the same organizational structures. There were a total of 25 chapters within the Legion, which consisted of 250,000 legionnaires that were capable of working in large numbers or smaller detachments, depending upon the gravity of a crisis. Notable officers and subformations of the Legion. As the Primarch, Roboute Guilliman retained complete command of the Legion, and chapter masters directly reported to him. Each chapter master oversaw about 10,000 warriors and a contingent of their fleet, and there was a cadre of senior officers known as the Legati to assist them. Every single one of these chapters had 10 companies, which consisted of 1,000 warriors known as the Legion Astartes. These warriors were trained by a captain who oversaw their tactical training and kept track of their efficiency. While this was all about the legions, there was a need for a military institution to guard the realm of Ultramar. The Primarch appointed a Tetrarch to act as the military dictator of one of the 5 king worlds of Ultramar, and they were known as the Tetrarch Council. The council consisted of Guilliman and the 4 major Tetrarchs, including Aikos Lamiad, Tauro Nicodemus, Ibn Frain, and Stolos Amintas. Other notable senior commanders included Marius Gage, or the First Master, and Orfeo Cassander, Valentus Dolor, and Dracus Godod. Besides these notable officers, the Ultramarines had a few specialized formations, such as the Evocati, Invictarus Suzerain, and the Fulmentarus Terminator Strike Squad. The Evocati were formed by Lord Commander Gren Vosotho, and they were the training ground of the 13 Legion. The Invictarus Suzerain were one of the most popular sub-formations, and they included a bunch of veterans who oversaw all functionings within the Legion. Besides this, the Fulmentarus Terminator Strike Squad were known for carrying the Cataphracti pattern Terminator armor, appearing as a heavy assault unit. In addition to these formations, the Locutarus Storm Squads were elite units deployed in extremely dangerous situations, while the Vigiloperti worked as a shadow unit and took care of any unexpected threats before they grew into bigger problems. Use of ammunition, vehicles, and fleets. In addition to special units, the Legion also relied on the extensive reserves of arms and ammunition that were mostly created among the Forge Worlds of Thramas. These legions also maintained a large stock of armor vehicles and rhino-armored carriers, and the 4th chapter was especially known for their wide range of tanks and heavy vehicles such as the Fellblade, Falchion, and Glaive. While these were standard arms, the Ultramarines Legion maintained a range of specialist vehicles that were over 100 years old, and they had a limited but effective naval fleet as well. However, they couldn't rely on their fleets for a wide-ranged assault, and Guilliman had then allied with the Imperial Armada fleets of the Ultima Segmentum in moments of crisis. Most of the Legion's fleet comprised several mid-sized cruisers, small battle barges, strike cruisers, and frigates. War disposition strategies. Before the Gazlak Crusade, most of the Ultramarines Legion was spread across the southern and eastern sections of the galaxy, and they were given a bunch of expeditionary fleets, and Guilliman eventually recalled 20 chapters to Calth. 14 of them were sent to Saturn to stock up on supplies, and roughly 200,000 warriors fought in the Battle of Calth. The battle had a traumatizing impact on the Legion, with only 40,000 soldiers making it out alive. While most of the chapters were destroyed to a point where survivors had to be reorganized into other chapters, a select few chapters managed to reconvene with only a quarter of their original strength. Some of these warriors were compelled to remain on Calth to protect the civilians and take care of the casualties of war, while most of the injured warriors made a swift recovery and returned to combat duties. This war was one of the most notably used examples of the Ultramarines' war strategies, and Guilliman typically deployed a bunch of chapters to the battlefield. At the same time, some chapters were sent on other missions, and the 7th chapter famously went on an expensive campaign to take care of an infestation on the eastern fringe during the Battle of Calth. At the same time, the 10th, 24th, and 25th chapters were otherwise occupied with other duties, and it wasn't feasible to recall them in time for the war. Chapter Organization of Ultramarines. While we've already explored Guilliman's decision to break down the legions into chapters, there were some ground rules that helped them organize these units. Creation of the Tyrannic War Veterans. Ultramarines were expected to follow the Codex religiously, and they only deviated from Guilliman's teachings in situations where they had no other option. One such event was the creation of the Tyrannic War Veterans in the aftermath of the First Company's Ultramarines' destruction during the Hive Fleet Behemoth. This company consisted of some of the most refined chapters in the Legion's history, and their destruction eventually led Chaplain Orton Cassius to form the Tyrannic War Veterans. These units were equipped to deal with the Xenos menace that had plagued the Ultramarines for ages, and around 12 members of the Ultramarines' First Company came together to form this squad. Ultramarines Honor Guard. The Honor Guard was made up of warriors who displayed an immense amount of courage on the battlefield, and they were then bestowed with the honor of guarding their chapter's banner. These Honor Guards wore highly intricate suits made of artificer armor, and they were given a powerful axe forged by the Tech Marines by using rare ores from the world of Prandium. The Honor Guard had special positions such as Chapter Ancient and Chapter Champion, which were highly regarded even within such a prestigious unit. Another such organization was known as the Victrix Guard, which consisted of hand-picked warriors who were appointed as the Primarch's bodyguards. Ultramarines Chapter Command. The Ultramarines' display of courage and ability helped them shine brighter than other Space Marines chapters, and every one of their fallen heroes inspired the entire Legion. While Chapter Master and Lord Macragge Marneus Calgar ruled over the Ultramarines for over 2 Terran centuries, Reboot Guilliman's return ushered in a new age of glory. Besides the warriors who made up these chapters, their entire organization had legions of chapter serfs, historitors, logisticators, astropaths, and acolytes who ensured the smooth functioning of day-to-day affairs. The Ultramarines treated these individuals with great respect and acknowledged their labors with a whole lot of gratitude. Ultramarines Chapter Armory. The Ultramarines Chapter Armory was situated in the pits of the Fortress of Hera on Macragge, and this place was home to all forms of weapons, war gears, vehicles, and even dreadnoughts who slept away until it was time for them to step on the battleground. The place was also home to innumerable servitors who worked endlessly to repair or construct new pieces of tank armor or ammunition. These Tech Marines dedicated their entire lives to ensure that the armory was stocked up, and they also had all forms of advanced technology and rare metals to work their magic. Ultramarines Librarians. The Ultramarines were known for maintaining a librarian full of potent psykers, who were highly skilled and trained to master the warp's power to its full potential. Every chapter had its rituals for selecting its librarians, but most of them followed the ancient laws of the Codex to narrow down the candidates. These librarians had a wide range of abilities, such as unleashing the fury of the Ancient in the form of a ghostly flame, channeling the light of the Emperor to heal any damage, firing blasts of psychic energies or war cries, and even inspiring and calming down any nearby allies. They were known for following the Codex with a strict discipline, and they trained their minds to gain abilities such as precognition, telepathic attacks, psychic shackles, and so on. Additionally, they could focus their thoughts on channeling warp energies to form a connection with other librarians, or look into the strands of the warp to learn about the future. Ultramarine chapters in 999 M41. Before the resurrection of Reboot Guilliman, Marneus Calgar held the position of the Lord of Macragge. He directly looked over the armory, apothecarium, reclusium, librarium, and the fleets. It goes without saying that the Lord of Macragge also oversaw the 10 companies, out of which the first company was considered as the veteran company. The second, third, and fourth companies were typically deployed in battle, while companies 6 to 9 were kept in reserve. Finally, the 10th company was considered to be a scout company, and they typically concerned themselves with recruiting more squads. Chapter Recruitment Process. As we've explored earlier, the Ultramarines recruited new Astartes or warriors from the masses in the realm of Ultramar. Any adolescent aspirant who wished to join the Ultramarines had to undergo one of the two types of trials, which typically began with an exposure trial. In this trial, they had to survive in one of the most difficult environments found on the boundaries of Ultramar, which proved to be tough for some candidates who had lived in exceptionally safer worlds. Some of the worlds of the Imperium of Man were utterly free from any adversities or dangers, and these places were mostly home to retired Imperial servants of wealthy merchants. These areas were cut off from most of mankind, while most of the Ultramar population lived in dangerous worlds. Their settlements were ridden with polluted rivers with thousands of years' worth of toxic waste or industry pollution, while other worlds were irradiated or home to hostile life forms. These life forms ranged from predatory animals to carnivorous plants and dangerous microbes, but humans still settled down in inhabitable spots if the planets had some strategic value. They even made themselves homes on planets with sub-zero ice, waste, deadly swamps, methane sumps, or exotic jungles, and the aspirants were usually sent to one of these dangerous worlds for their exposure trial. The only task was to survive in such an environment, and natives had an advantage in this stage of the recruitment process. However, these individuals typically stuck together. For instance, the communities within the Deathworld jungle relied on total cooperation to survive and refused to let each other out of their sight. Individuals from these worlds were also expected to survive all alone during the exposure trial, meaning they'd also have to venture into the wilderness by themselves for the first time. The Ultramarines often tested the aspirants' fortitude in specific environments such as icy wastelands, and their task would then be to make it out alive while traveling across hundreds of kilometers in trackless, snow-blasted plains. Some aspirants had to travel across an entire continent of irradiated ash dunes, pass impenetrable mountain ranges, or even swim across an infested ocean. In some variations of the exposure trial, aspirants were entirely isolated from their home environment and sent to a contrasting world where they couldn't use their past experiences to survive. For instance, an aspirant from a feral world would be sent to someplace like a hive city, where they'd be compelled to live in a predator-infested jungle. Most of these trials were impossible to survive, and the rules then dictated that the aspirants who managed to stay alive for the longest time would be considered victorious. After declaring them as winners, these aspirants were rushed to the chapter's apothecaries, but most of them sadly succumbed to their wounds at some point. However, they were revived by the chapter in most cases and then declared worthy of becoming an Astartes neophyte. The Ultramarines were known for using the exposure trial on innumerable occasions, and some of the most elite warriors of the realm were often known for casting out their newborns into the wilderness to teach them how to survive. While the exposure trial was the most widely used, a second trial for the aspirants was called the challenge trial. In this trial, the aspirant had to duel or fight against a full Astartes in some way, and they were not entirely expected to win. These aspirants were judged on their degree of failure, and it was pretty rare for an aspirant to defeat a fully trained Astartes. Such winners were destined for greatness, and they often went on to become legendary heroes of the chapter. In most cases, the challenge trials involved a martial arts test, where the aspirant was allowed to have arms, while the Astartes had to fight with his bare hands to ensure a fair fight. Even then, the aspirant barely stood any chance against the Astartes, who managed to kill the aspirants in barely one attack. Challenge trials were not only a test of strength and stamina, but also tested the contestants' skills and mental strength. These tests ranged from lifting heavy goods to imbibing toxic substances, and any aspirant who put up a good fight was deemed worthy by the chapter. In such cases, they were rushed to the apothecaries and deemed worthy of progressing to the next state, even if they'd failed the trial. Even though most of the Ultramarines had been raised in noble Ultramar families, these aspirants were taught that their family status was meaningless and they had to prove their worth. Every battle brother was considered equal in the eyes of the Emperor and Primarch, and Ultramarines only received special status after proving themselves on the battleground. The legacy of the chapter's gene seed. Compared to other Space Marine chapters, the Ultramarines' gene seed was considered highly stable. It had no mutations except the required pattern, and there was barely a 10% chance of mutation after implanting this gene seed. This risk was eliminated entirely after the introduction of the stable stock of modified Primaris gene seed, and this chapter's gene seed boasted a full functionality of implanted organs to achieve projected specifications. From a psycho-organic perspective, Ultramarine initiates displayed a heightened level of aggression paired with a pathological need to achieve their desired goals. They worked in cohesion with other warriors and strictly followed the established hierarchy as opposed to the psychogenetic profiles generated by other chapters. The White Scars, or Space Wolves, were notable for their individualistic nature post-implantation of the gene seed, while the Ultramarines' heightened sense of accomplishment and regard for rules created quite a legacy for this chapter's gene seed. Exploring the character of the Ultramarines chapter. While every chapter had its unique character and personality traits, the Ultramarines Legion sought inspiration from Spartan culture and Roman societies. They studied their military organization terms and their army, which served as an example for all other Codex-compliant chapters. The Ultramarines also had total domination over all the star systems of Ultramar, which gave them unparalleled contact with the entire Imperial citizenry and an inhuman level of affinity for the common population among the Adeptus Astartes chapter. They viewed themselves as the protectors of the innocent, and they were considered one of the noblest Space Marine chapters. Ultramarines rarely put their own interest above others, and they fought to protect people's lives more than they fought for any glory or honor. While some other chapters avoided working with aliens like the Aladari or the Tau Empire, the Ultramarines were willing to work with them if it meant that they could save lives. Some Imperial organizations would ally with alien forces and eventually refuse to uphold their part of the deal, but the Ultramarines had never reneged on their deals after victory. In this way, the Ultramarines' moral values and honor gave them quite a high position throughout the Imperium. They were also equipped to rule over more than 8 star systems from their homeworld of Macragge, and one can only imagine the number of warriors they'd managed to recruit from this realm. The Ultramarines trained their newest members at the Fortress of Hera, a fortress monastery located in the highest ranges of Macragge. They assessed all the children from training academies across their realm and handpicked the bravest of them to bring to the fortress. They trained as Space Marine aspirants and eventually grew up to become the Adeptus Astartes, or the Angels of Death, who were considered to be the most feared warriors in the Imperium. Guilliman was quite an exemplary Primarch, and he set down all the foundations for the Ultramarines, as well as the entire Imperium's fighting forces in the Codex Astartes. The Codex was the physical embodiment of his military genius, and it has specific guidelines and strategies for nearly any situation imaginable, ranging from the correct posture while marching to tips on how to execute a planetary assault. He'd covered all bases while compiling the Codex. The Ultramarines' character was most importantly defined after the breaking up of the first founding Space Marine legions, which led to the formation of smaller chapters. This ensured that no one could single-handedly call the shots for an entire legion, and each chapter had no more than 1,000 soldiers to ensure that they could be managed easily. Besides these characteristics, the Ultramarines were notably praised for applying Guilliman's teachings to every aspect of their life, and their doctrine was the same as that of Ultramarines who existed 10,000 years ago. Their loyalty to their Primarch and his Codex helped them create quite a stellar realm, considered the closest thing to an imperial human utopia in a galaxy known for war. Deep-rooted beliefs and traditions. So far, we've commented on the Ultramarines' sense of honor and courage, and they truly had some deep-rooted beliefs and traditions within the chapter. They strictly followed the writings in the holy pages of the Codex Astartes, and any disregard toward these inscriptions was considered to be a blasphemous act. They viewed the Codex as a divine work of wisdom that was sanctified by none other than the Emperor, and they believed that they shouldn't deviate from its writings in any situation. They were also taught to discipline themselves and be self-reliant right from birth, which strengthened their character and helped them stay true to the Codex's teachings for the rest of their lives. In all their duties, the Ultramarines remained calm and analyzed all outcomes before going through with any plan. They also rarely lost their temper and were considered facilitators and peacemakers, among other chapters. They were known for brokering agreements and truces between two entirely opposite parties, and they completely memorized the Codex Astartes, which helped them find the solution to any unforeseen problem. Successor chapters and their lineage. Since we've explored the impact of the Ultramarine gene seed, it's safe to say that several Space Marine chapters owe their genetic heritage to the Ultramarines' Primarch. Among other successor chapters, the Sons of Guilliman were one of their direct descendants and accounted for nearly 2/3 of the Space Marine population by the end of the 41st millennium. The Guilliman were known for maintaining their own traditions, and they followed the teachings of Raboot Guilliman. He was considered to be their Primarch and liege, and the Codex Astartes also dictated that every chapter must lay down its own unique rules, badges, and heraldry. The Sons of Guilliman viewed the Ultramarines as exemplars, believed that Ultramar was a model civilization from which they could seek inspiration. Of course, there would be several instances of misunderstandings between the Ultramarines and their successors, but these fights were quite rare. Among other successors, the Primogenitors were created after the original Ultramarines Legion split into several chapters during the second founding. They're often known as the Ultramarines Firstborns, and they all had their own traditions per the rules laid down in the Codex Astartes. While there are 12 Primogenitor chapters listed in this holy book, some believe there were 11 more chapters, but they seem to be lost with time and have no historical proof of existence. Legendary Ultramarines throughout history. Heresy era. All the legendary Ultramarines throughout history can be classified as Heresy and post-Heresy era personnel. It goes without saying that Primarch Raboot Guilliman was the single most legendary Ultramarine throughout history. He single-handedly reshaped the Imperium of Man and eventually even served as the Lord Commander of the Imperium. He greatly reformed the Ultramarines' organizational structures, penned down the Codex Astartes that laid down the tactics for all Space Marine legions. After he was fatally injured in a fight against his own corrupt brother, Fulgrim, his dying body was placed into temporal stasis for years until he eventually returned to life. Besides Guilliman, Lord Commander Gren Vossathor played a huge role in leading the 13 Legion and training the Terran initiates. He also dealt with the Osiris cluster and notably fought against the Xenos traps. With time, Vossathor transferred Legion's command to Marius Gage, who's also known as the First Master. Gage played a huge role in leading the Legion during the Great Crusade, and especially played a big part in the Battle of Calth. Over time, some notable leaders stepped up to lead the Legion's companies during the Great Crusade and the Horus Heresy eras. Captain Stellok Ethon and Captain Ericon Gaius led the 19th and 21st Companies, respectively, while Captain Lucretius Corvo was a distinguished captain of the 90th Company. Along the same lines, Lysimachus Castus, Teutona, and Remus Ventanus were captains of the 7th, 15th, and 4th Companies, respectively. Captain Obadiah, Warden of the Pharos, stepped up to be the first chapter master of the 3rd Founding Scythes of the Emperor chapter, while Captain Tullian Aquila served as a sergeant during the Battle of Calth. Besides leading legions, some notable Ultramarines also took care of other segments, such as the libraries and apothecaries. Chief Librarian Ptolemy was known as the greatest librarian of the Ultramarines, and he even founded the Library of Ptolemy. Tylos Rubio was well known as a Space Marine psyker, while Apothecary Theon single-handedly healed many of his fallen brothers during the Great Crusade. Other notable Ultramarines from the Heresy era were Ancient Marcellus and Honored Telemachus, who had shown exemplary courage and fought against several opponents at once during the Battle of Calth. Telemachus also gained the nickname Fury of Calth, while other warriors such as Ancient Tyrrhenius and Centurion Arion Merceror also greatly contributed to the Ultramarines during the Great Crusade and the events of Horus Heresy. Legionnaires such as Cletos, Cleon, Solon, Navis, Verdinius, and Kratos were some of the most respected and well-known warriors across different commands and chapters of the Ultramarines. In addition to them, Legat Castor Alcade served as the commanding officer of the 25th chapter and single-handedly led an army of warriors during the Battle of Molech. Sergeant Aenid Thiel, Invictus Sadovan, and Invictus Lucian Cassian were notable leaders who led the Ultramarines during the Horus Heresy, especially during the Battle of Calth. Among them, Centurion Arion Merceror led the Vindicus squad of the 1st Company, even at the cost of his life. While these names might get lost in a sea of warriors, the Ultramarines honored and remembered all of their contributions and continued to fight for their fallen brothers, even in the post-Heresy era. Post-Heresy era. After the Great Crusade and the tragedy of Horus Heresy, Marneus Calgar stepped up to be the Ultramarines chapter master for most of the 41st millennium. He wielded the legendary gauntlets of Ultramar and made history by being the first person to go through the Rubicon Primaris surgery to become an enhanced Space Marine. While Calgar might be one of the most influential chapter masters, Olonius also made quite a mark while overseeing the Ultramarines in the early 36th millennium. Some other notable chapter masters were Agnathio, Odenathus, and Tigris Deacon, who filled this position during the 32nd millennium as well. In the present day, Fennius Maxim oversees the process of forging new ammunition and is also referred to as the Master of the Forge. At the same time, Vado Tigurius is well respected as the Chief Librarian, while Orton Cassius is the Ultramarines Master of Sanctity. Some other notable personnel are Corpus Helix and Laszlo Tiberius, who take care of the apothecary and the fleets, respectively. The post-heresy era was defined by the Indomitus Crusade, and Codicea, Thaddeus Agrippan, and Chaplain Anthonus Decius are two notable figures who commanded this fleet. When it comes to leading the chapters, Captain Saul Invictus led the 1st Company for the longest time before Severus Agamam took his place. In the same way, Demetrian Titus and Cato Sicarius notably led the 2nd Company until Sevastus Acheran was named the new captain during the War of Beasts. Currently, Captain Mikhail Fabian has stepped up to lead the 3rd Company, while Genus Ardius was his predecessor as the commander. In the same manner, Uriel Ventris commands the 4th Company, while Captain Felion replaced Caito Galenus as the commander of the 5th Company. In the present day, Maximus Apathus, Gerard Ixion, Helios, Sinon, and Antilochus currently lead the remaining 5 companies, respectively. Besides these commanding officers, some personalities held special positions in the Ultramarines Legion. For instance, Captain Decimus Felix was one of the first Primaris Space Marines before he became the commander of the 11th Company, while Captain Kruger stepped up to be a force commander during a war against the Word-Bearers and the Daemons. Marius Avincus and Prascus were two prominent watch captains in the Ultramarines army, while Ancient Tortulus, Ancient Galatan, and Ancient Helveticus were the bearers of the Banner of Macragge. In addition, Basanius Lysan, Lyricus Abantes, Antaro Cronus, Sidonus, Castus, Torius Telion, and Vandarius were some of the most highly regarded sergeants in their force. Veteran Malum Cado gained quite some popularity as a Stern Guard veteran, while figures such as Isoros Prenon, Trismerus Gororian, and Morvio Taralis came together to form the Victrix Honor Guard. Sacred relics of the chapter. Over the years, the Ultramarines had managed to acquire quite an impressive collection of relics that aided them in battle. Some of these are as follows. Banner of Macragge. This ancient battle stand was considered one of the most precious items in the chapter, and it was touched by the Emperor himself at the start of the Great Crusade. Over time, he presented this banner to Guilliman, and the Ultramarines preserved this relic for 10 standard millennia from all forms of deterioration. They passed down this relic to their successors like a burning torch, which was one of the sincerest displays of affection they held towards their immortal emperor. Standard of Macragge, Inviolate. On that note, the Ultramarines also had another banner known as the Standard of Macragge Inviolate, which flew above the swarms of xenobeasts around the time of the First Tyrannic War. Over time, this banner became a symbol of pride and determination, and it warned the opponents that they'd never be able to match their skills. Cingulum. Commonly seen among several chapters, the cingulum was a belt created out of several studded leather straps. It was typically used to hang any accolades of valor, such as a Victorex. It was often decorated with small detailed plates. First Company Relic. After the tragic loss of the First Company during their fight against the High Fleet Behemoth, the Ultramarines preserved a small piece of their armor. This relic reminded them of the warrior's sacrifice and inspired them to work harder for their brothers who had given up their lives for the Ultramarine cause. Gauntlets of Ultramar. As the name suggests, the Gauntlets of Ultramar were a pair of power fists with integrated bolters, and rumors dictated that the Primarch had taken these from a Chaos champion after defeating him in hand-to-hand combat during the Great Crusade. Gilded Bolt Gun. Among other pieces of treasured weapons, the Gilded Bolt Gun was a work of art, and this master-crafted bolt gun eventually made its way to Jericho Reach. Helm of Vartheon. The Helm of Vartheon was one of the most important artifacts in Ultramarines history, and it originally belonged to Sergeant Vartheon. After destroying hundreds of Xenos, Vartheon's squad had created history among the Legion, and his helm's August sensors and Prophesier readouts made it the perfect instrument for any warrior. Additionally, the helm was fitted with a dedicated cogitator bank, which could generate tactical recommendations after analyzing thousands of years of their combat history. Heraldry Scrolls. As a long-standing tradition, Ultramarines would scribble or carve their names on metal pieces or placards so that their enemies would remember them as the ones who had brought about their deaths. Honor Blades. Honor Blades were a set of matching broadswords and power swords, and they were honorable relics that were presented to the champions of any chapter. When used together, these blades enabled the user to have an expert defense as well as offense. Hood of Hellfire. Presented as a modified version of the Psychic Hood, this hood provided protection from any incoming psychic assaults and additionally enabled Chief Librarian Tigurius to conserve his body's energy. Infernus. Crafted by High Chaplain Orton Cassius, the Infernus was a master-crafted combi flamer loaded with Hellfire rounds capable of doing much more damage than any regular ammunition. Jaw of Bloodcharm. This ancient relic was a chainsword that belonged to Tactical Squad Sergeant Curiel, who wielded it during an important war on Agriworld. When Curiel's captain died during the war, he stepped up to take command of the unit and managed them effortlessly. Soon enough, he was promoted to the First Company, and this weapon was bestowed upon many up-and-coming Ultramarines over the years. Legatine Axes. Guilliman designed the Legatine Axes after studying thousands of weapons across humanity, and it was considered a precise and perfectly balanced instrument. While it required some skill on the owner's part, it was capable of doing a lot more harm than any normal axe. This axe was typically presented to the elite officers of the Suzerain Invictorus subformation. Mantle of Suzerain. Worked by the Suzerain Invictorus's Captain Cato Sicarius, this weapon provided an enhanced level of protection to anyone who donned it. The mantle had the Second Company's heraldic colors, as well as an iron halo and a golden aquila. Mantles of Ultramar. The Mantles of Ultramar were discovered on a pre-Age Strife warship, and there were about 7 mantles in total. These mantles had shielded the lives of several Legion warriors over the years, and they symbolized sacrifice and unfailing dedication toward duty. Hammer of Macragge. The Ultramarines had an age-old hammer known as the Hammer of Macragge, which has been used against enemy forces for several millennia. This weapon was created with the help of ancient technology that was barely understood by the tech marines of the 41st millennium. It was mostly used by the Second Company. Soldier's Blade. While it might appear as a deceptively simple sword, the Soldier's Blade had been around since the Legion's founding, and it could carve through the thickest plates of ceramite and plasteel. Armor of Konor. The armor of Konor was an ornate, elaborate suit constructed from thousands of microscopic layers of durable materials, which was inspired by the Indomitus pattern Terminator armor. These protective layers retained their structure even against the most destructive attacks, and this armor was gifted to the Ultramarines envoy on Konor. Besides these relics, there are a few other specialized artifacts such as the Rod of Tigurius that drew upon his psychic energy, the Talisarian Tempest Blade that was capable of slaying an opponent in a single strike, and a Stormbolter called Urion's Doom. Lieutenant Demetrian Titus also wielded a Vengeance launcher that fired explosive mines, and on that note, the Ultramarines also had a defensive energy field projector known as the Sanctic Halo. They also stored Sergeant Thiel's Helm of Censure, which contained information on the optimal methods to kill any opponent. The Ultramarines further had a Torrentian cloak made with the help of Dark Age technology that provided immediate medicare and rejuvenated the wearer while fighting in the desert wastelands. Special issue war gear and unique armaments of Ultramarines. The Ultramarines were some of the most powerful warriors among all the chapters, and they owed a lot of their victories to their special issue war gear. Along with their successes, they garnered quite an unparalleled collection of weapons over the course of the Terran millennia of war. Some of these armaments are as follows. Adamantine mantle, laced with threads of braided adamantium. These flowing cloaks could deflect the strongest of attacks and protect the warrior from any incoming damage. Often, the warriors combined their mantle with armor and defensive energy fields to put on a solid defensive front. Artificer armor. Created by some of the finest artificers of the Ultramarines chapter, these power armors were heavily detailed suits with a whole range of protective functions. This piece of armor was considered to be superior to the Terminator armor, and this was an honorable piece of clothing that was only bestowed to the most accomplished champions of the Imperium. Hell Fury bolts. Also known as the Hellfire bolts, these potent bolts were laced with reserves of bioreactive acids. Upon firing them, the victims' bodies would entirely burn from the inside out, and the Ultramarines typically reserved using them for special fights against the Tyranids. Reliquary of Vengeance. Over the last millennia, innumerable Ultramarines have fought for the Imperium, and there's no limit to the number of warriors who lost their lives on the battlefield. To honor those who had fallen in duty, the ashes or bones of these champions were preserved in a reliquary that could then be attached to the armor of another Ultramarine armor. In this way, the current pool of warriors was inspired to fight in their name and get vengeance on their behalf while also giving them a fitting tribute. Seal of Oath. The Ultramarines had a whole lot of rituals and traditions, and many of their successor chapters continued in their footsteps to honor the Seal of Oath. Since the start of time, Ultramarines have sworn oaths to reboot Guilliman and the Emperor before stepping on the battleground. These oaths were recorded on parchment pieces by chapter serfs, and they were then blessed by chaplains before being bonded to a warrior's armor with wax seals. In this way, the warrior was bound to uphold the sacred oaths, and they often chose to die before failing or dishonoring their vow. Sunwrath Pistol. As a gesture of goodwill, Archmagus Dominus Belisarius Cawl gifted a range of advanced plasma pistols to reboot Guilliman at the beginning of the Indomitus Crusade. Guilliman then handed these to warriors who had displayed great acts of bravery in the face of the enemy. These Sunwrath pistols were known for their superior venting coils and an inner barrel of heat-conducting crystals that enabled the user to fire numerous shots without worrying about overheating. Marvelous verdict, and with that, we come to the end of our exploration of the entire history of the Ultramarines and their practices. Undoubtedly, they've stepped up to be the most impactful Space Marine chapters, and they're truly one of the pillars of the Warhammer 40k franchise. The Ultramarines' code of honor and warrior mindset deserve some special praise, and we'd love to hear your thoughts on these fearsome soldiers in the comments below. And if you liked our content, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to us if you haven't already. Have a good one and be safe. Thanks everyone.